Welcome back. Now, United Kingdom's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has asked the Queen to suspend Parliament till mid-October. Some MPs have criticised the move as an attempt to block legislation which would bar a no-deal Brexit. But Johnson says he asked the Parliament to be prorogued so the government's plans can be unveiled before Brexit. He says there will be ample time to debate Brexit before and after an EU summit on October 17th. Johnson said he will schedule a Queen's speech for October 14th in order to launch new legislation. It comes a day after Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn met MPs to plan a strategy for stopping a no-deal Brexit. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has called the move a dark day in Britain's political history. Now, for more on this, we have with us Holly Hudson from London. Thanks, Holly, for being with us. United Kingdom Prime Minister has asked the Queen to suspend Parliament till mid-October. So do you get the sense that Johnson may have decided to step Parliament aside?
Well, this is Boris Johnson sidestepping Parliament. There's been rumours circulating for some time now that this was the government's plan, that they were intending to prorogue or shut down Parliament. And we now know why Boris Johnson wouldn't rule it out even this weekend at the G7 summit. Essentially, what it means is that it's an extension of the parliamentary recess, which already happens. They go on conference, what's called conference recess, until the beginning of October. Boris Johnson now wants to ask the Queen for an extension of that suspension. But the reason this is so controversial is that this isn't the normal process. These aren't normal times. In the Brexit context here in Britain, nothing is. And particularly the issue that is so contentious with regards to the request for this suspension of Parliament means that MPs will have their time curtailed to block a no-deal Brexit. Now, Boris Johnson, we heard him earlier say that that's not the case at all. This is not an anti-democratic move, as opposition MPs would have you believe. This is just the typical process when a new government, a new administration begins. The state opening of Parliament has just been pushed back slightly, but this isn't a normal situation, and it certainly curtails the time that MPs have to push through any legislation to try and stop no-deal Brexit. So a very fierce reaction from opposition MPs who only yesterday decided to focus on legislative ways to try and block a no-deal Brexit. So that option seemingly potentially off the table, or at least definitely the pressure is on for them to act in the next coming weeks or days.
Right, Holly. So do you get the sense that Johnson may have to sidestep Parliament eventually?
Yes, this is a clear message from Boris Johnson that he's pushing ahead with his deal or no deal. We will leave the EU by the 31st of October, sidestepping Parliament, or at least trying to stop them from stopping him getting through no deal. Because even in this context of Brexit here in Britain at the moment, there was talk of Parliament not going on conference recess and actually sticking around in order to try and debate and figure out ways of blocking Boris Johnson from pushing through no deal. Others argue that this is a clever attacking move from Boris Johnson because it actually could bring back the vote of no confidence in his government. It is a risk because it could do that. However, that means that if it's a yes, then obviously no deal, he would be able to force through no deal. If it's a no, then he would actually potentially face a general election, which may not seem on first glance what you'd expect Boris Johnson to want in the first few months of his premiership, but actually he has a very slim majority in Parliament, so it's going to be very difficult for him to win any votes, win any sort of amendments to a motion. So what he would want to do is actually get a majority in order to either push through no deal Brexit, but definitely push through his domestic agenda, give him that legitimacy, give him that mandate, which the opposition MPs say he just doesn't have to take us out of the EU without a deal.
Right, Holly. And what is the likelihood of the Conservative government surviving the next 2 months, considering the huge political pressure?
There is huge political pressure. This is causing, has already caused a huge row. This move, this cunning plan, as many MPs see it, by Boris Johnson to either avert a bloc to a no deal or potentially lead to another general election. Yesterday, a group of opposition MPs led by the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn came to the conclusion that their tactics to stop no deal would be to focus on legislative measures to block no deal, seeking a request to the an extension of the 31st of October deadline that the EU has set. But now that time, the time that they have to do that, is seriously curtailed. They would have to act in the next week. So it's piling the pressure on the opposition MPs. And Boris Johnson, even though that is a risk, he does risk setting MPs against him with such a slim majority. And that could lead to a vote of no confidence coming back, opposition MPs bringing that back and bringing down the Johnson government, which would then install a caretaker government and would then lead to a general election. But that, as I said, could mean, could be what he wants. That could have been the cunning plan all along for him to increase his majority. We do know that obviously he is a character. The Conservatives voted for him to become their leader, mainly because they see him as the man who can deliver Brexit, who does have that charisma to potentially win a general election against Jeremy Corbyn. But it is still a risk of Boris Johnson's part. So we could see Britain's third Prime Minister in the year.
Right. Johnson has taken a risk. Thank you, Holly Hudson, for joining us live on Indus News from London. Now, Britain's opposition parties have agreed to work together to prevent a no-deal Brexit. Opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn says they will try to delay Brexit until a deal is reached. Corbyn was hosting talks with opposition parties in London. Opposition leaders and cross-party MPs signed the Church House Declaration. They said the bill could avert a no-deal Brexit better than a no-confidence vote in Boris Johnson. Corbyn asked Conservative and Independent MPs to support the bill.
I've written to all 116 MPs that voted against no deal to ask them if they will recognise the importance next week of supporting a legislative approach, which would be an all-party approach, to ensure that we don't crash out with all the problems that will create for existing jobs and businesses, for supply chains in the food processing industry, medicine supplies, and of course the future of our agriculture.
The bill, if passed, can force the British Prime Minister to ask the EU for a further Brexit delay. The current deadline is October 31st. Now, moving on, Italy's populist and centre-left leaders are walking to a tightrope as the deadline to form a new government ends today. President Sergio Mattarella would call fresh elections at the end of the day. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte resigned after Leave Party chief Matteo Salvini withdrew from the ruling alliance. Attempts to reunite the coalition have since failed. Negotiations on forming a new coalition were boosted yesterday. The Democratic Party has appeared to back Conte's reinstatement. The US President Donald Trump waded into the crisis, backing Conte's apparent reinstatement. Now, India's Supreme Court has issued a notice to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. The court has taken up petitions against India's revoking of occupied Kashmir's special status. Kashmiri activists and politicians have mounted the challenge to India's illegal move. Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi issued the notice despite the opposition of government lawyers. He said the court's order will not be changed. The case has been adjourned till early October. A 5-member constitutional bench of the top court will hear the petition. Moving on, Taliban insurgents have killed 14 soldiers in an attack on a checkpoint in western Afghanistan, Herat Province. Now, the Herat police spokesman Abdul Ahid Walid Zada said 7 others were wounded. The Taliban claim they have killed 42 government soldiers in other attacks since yesterday. Spokesman Zabihullah says operations were conducted in Faryab, Ghazni and Helmand provinces. Taliban have again said they are very close to concluding a peace agreement with the United States. In a statement issued in Doha, spokesperson Suhail Shaheen said he hopes to share good news with Afghans soon. Shaheen said talks between the Taliban and US representatives are resuming today. He said the final points of a peace agreement with Washington are being finalized. The 9th round of peace talks to end the 18-year-long Afghan war started last week. Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe have discussed the security situation in Middle East. They met in Turkey during Zarif's two-day visit to Japan on the latest leg of his Asian tour. The Japanese media reports the two discussed ways to reduce tensions between Iran and the United States. In a statement, Zarif has said he and Abe held consultations on securing gains made under the 2015 nuclear agreement. Moving on, Lebanon has stressed its right to defend itself after two Israeli drones violated its airspace. President Michel Aoun announced the act as a declaration of war. Lebanon's Higher Defense Council says the country has a right to defend itself against any aggression. Prime Minister Saad Hariri said the attack poses a threat to regional stability. It says Israel used the attack to change rules of engagement. The violation of Lebanese airspace came after Israel launched strikes in neighboring Syria. Yemen's Houthi rebels have destroyed tons of food aid help to months in the war-torn country. The UN says the aid had been intended for families in the city of Taiz in November 2018. For details, watch this report.
Yemen was already the Arabian Peninsula's poorest country when a Saudi-led coalition intervened in 2015 to prop up the government. Conflict has triggered malnutrition, and the UN calls it the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The WFP says it feeds around 11 million people a month in Yemen. Food distribution to Houthi-controlled territories in June were stopped after food meant for Yemeni civilians was diverted. Food program spokesperson says they need unimpeded access to all areas of the country to provide food to those who need it most.
We warned the organizations, the international organizations, to take their responsibilities. Otherwise, we will deter those who might be tempted to do this again. Providing expired food to the Yemeni people, we will never allow this.
The UN says it was desperate for funds in Yemen when a shortage of cash forced it to temporarily stop its aid programs.
Now in Germany, France and Britain have condemned North Korea for its plans to develop new ballistic missiles. The criticism of North Korea follows a closer meeting of the UN Security Council. In a joint statement at the UN, the three EU countries said Pyongyang's launches violate UNSC resolutions. European envoys to the UN called on North Korea to abandon its nuclear weapons program.
And we reiterate our condemnation of such repeated provocative launches, which are violations of UN Security Council resolutions. North Korea must take concrete steps towards its complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization.
Recent North Korean short-range missiles have sparked alarm in neighboring Japan and South Korea. But US President Donald Trump has dismissed the launches as insignificant. Moving on, Japan has dropped South Korea from its list of preferred trading partners. This intensifies the diplomatic spat between the key US allies. Seoul has been dropped from the list over a wartime forced labor dispute. Japanese manufacturers must now seek approval for each technology-related export contract for Seoul. Seoul's previous status as a preferential trade partner meant simpler checks on exports. South Korea's foreign ministry has summoned Japanese envoy Yasumasa Nagamine to lodge a complaint. Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon says he will take the matter to World Trade Organization. South Korea has also ended a military intelligence sharing pact with Japan. Now, Japan is evacuating 250,000 people from southern Kyushu in the wake of heavy rains. The country's Met Agency has issued its highest emergency warning, citing extreme weather. The agency says there is a risk of landslides and flooding because of the downpours. It says parts of the northern island are experiencing more torrential rain. Japan's state media says 2 men have died in rain-related accidents in Saga Prefecture and Fukuoka. These areas were hit with more than 100 millimeters of rainfall in an hour. Meanwhile, Brazil is ready to accept $22 million in aid from G7 countries to fight fires in the Amazon. President Jair Bolsonaro had already rejected the offer, demanding the French president apologize for calling him a liar. Bolsonaro's spokesperson Rodrigo Barros says aid will only be accepted if Brazil controls the way it is spent. In Porto Velho, scores of people are seeking treatment for respiratory problems caused by smoke. Medics say children are worst affected by intensifying smog from the rainforest fires. Meanwhile, Peru and Colombia have called for an emergency meeting of the Amazonian nations next month. Now in Mexico, 23 people have been killed in a fire at a bar in the coastal state of Veracruz. The Attorney General's office says 8 women are among the dead. It said 13 others were severely injured and are being treated at local hospitals. The Attorney General's office says it is investigating if the fire was started deliberately. In Peru, archaeologists have unearthed the remains of 227 children. The sacrificial site was used by the pre-Columbian Chimu culture. The remains were unveiled after a 3-year of digging in Huanachacu, a beachside tourist town in Lima. Chief archaeologist Ferran Castillo says the children aged between 4 and 14 were sacrificed to honor the Chimu god. Chimu culture thrived between 1200 and 1400 CE. Archaeologists first found children's remains at a site in the town of Pampa La Cruz neighborhood. 56 skeletons were unearthed in June 2018. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has approved an emergency declaration for Puerto Rico ahead of Tropical Storm Dorian. Trump instructed federal agencies to handle all the island's disaster relief efforts. Storm Dorian caused power blackouts, uprooted trees, and ripped off roofs in Barbados and St. Lucia. The storm is expected to become a hurricane after it moves across Puerto Rico later today. It's on track to hit the Bahamas and Florida. The U.S. Federal Management Agency says nearly 3,000 federal employees have been stationed to offer assistance. Now, coming up next in the bulletin after a short break is inflow of tourists to occupied valley drops. Airbus and Boeing will have to compete with a new player. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news. The inflow of tourists to Indian-occupied Kashmir has drastically declined as the lockdown in the valley has crossed over 20 days. This has distressed locals, many of whom rely on tourism for their livelihoods. Or in this report.
With its breathtaking scenery, snow-capped mountains and placid lakes, Indian-occupied Kashmir is a popular destination for tourists. But on August 5th, India illegally revoked its special status as a disputed territory. Since then, New Delhi has shut down communications and clamped down on freedom of movement in the occupied valley. This has gone on to hit the tourism industry hard, which employs some 100,000 people.
90% is tourism, Kashmir depend on tourism. So they know they are dependent on tourism, let's do like this. And they have trapped us. Even in Eid, we couldn't buy anything. We couldn't buy any vegetable, we couldn't buy any food for our family, we couldn't celebrate.
According to official data, more than 500,000 people visited the valley in the first 7 months of this year. Since New Delhi scrapped the occupied valley's autonomy, just 150 foreign travellers have visited Kashmir.
We hope to see many travelers and tourists in here, and we can talk each other, but we cannot see everything. I think it is really inconvenient and for local people, and actually some people privately express that they are very unhappy about this. It's what I thought.
The valley has faced major disruptions in 2008 and 2010, and recently in 2016, when large protests broke out. But this time the residents say there is no end to the current crisis in sight, and they fear the situation will get worse and cause massive unrest.
A Chinese-made jetliner completed its first test flight at Beijing Daxing International Airport earlier this week. This means heavyweights of the industry like Airbus and Boeing will have to compete with a new player. More in this report.
From cell phones to 5G infrastructure, China has made inroads into key global industries, and now China is trying to make its mark in the Boeing industry.
I feel very proud as a pilot flying a passenger jet manufactured independently by China and landing at the Daxing airport.
The Chinese-made passenger jet left the city of Chengdu, landing at Beijing's Daxing airport 2 hours later. After the landing, the ARJ-21 completed a series of test exercises.
We fly to Daxing Airport as part of second stage flight tests of the newly built airport. We mainly undertake tests including simulated low visibility flight, desing drill, airport catering, and sewage disposal, among others.
The ARJ-21 flies at an altitude of nearly 12,000 meters and can reach speeds of up to 827 kilometers an hour. The aircraft will later fly back to Chengdu as part of its next phase of testing.
Now with the business stories, the European Union has launched an investigation into Google's job search tool. Google places a widget at the top of searches, circumventing the need to click through to job sites. EU Competition Commissioner Margrethe Vestager questioned whether it is fair for Google to have such controls over its rivals. 23 job search sites urged Brussels to take action last month. Google's competitors fear the move is a ploy to gain market share before monetizing its business model. European stock markets are mostly lower in early trading over fears of impending recession in the US. Asian stocks have closed flat on lingering doubts about trade talks between the United States and China. Frankfurt's DAX and the CAC index in Paris are in negative territory. London's FTSE 100 is marginally up. Investors are cautious because long-term US bond yields have dipped further below rates for short-term paper. Many economists see the inverted yield curve as the evidence the US economy is headed into recession. In Asia, the Shanghai Composite and Hong Kong's Hang Seng have closed down a fraction. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index is highly. Seoul's Kospi has gained nearly 1%. That's despite Japan's exclusion of South Korea from its preferential trade list today. Now let's have a look at the weather updates across the world. Well, viewers, with the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For more news and updates, stay tuned with Indus News.